So, in order for the audience to understand some of the process going into this video, I kind of want to expose a slight amount of the writing process for the weekly videos that I've recently started doing. The work cycle for them has actually generally been a 3-day process each time, although it's really more of a 2-day process, 1 day of scripting, 1 day of recording, and then the last day being when the video actually comes out in the morning. Part of the reason I'm doing things this way is because past attempts to make weekly videos resulted in burnout when I was working on them constantly, and it was stifling my efforts to make more long-term content that actually tends to get more views, like Boon Canon. So this quarter to half week video cycle actually gives me free time to do more and be able to eventually capitalize when a particular subject matter blows the fuck up. Yes, that does mean more Genshin going forward, trust me, there are going to be more videos on that. So, why is it necessary to bring that up here? Simple. It's an important note in regards to this video in particular. The script is going to be written 2 days before the video comes out, and although I'll try to include some things that are happening on Tuesday as well, most likely certain specifics will wind up just covered next week if they come up. Although it does seem like Wizards is taking New Year's week off in terms of spoilers. But basically, part of what I'm doing is I'm avoiding making this about any individual cards due to how tight the release schedule would be when talking about most of them, save for what I'm using as evidence of what I'm saying. So, let's get into what I'm saying. In particular, what I mean when I ask the question that's the title of the video. This is somewhat late, but the idea of this is to predict what the mechanics of Aetherdrift are going to look like in the set. And the reason I bring up my process is that, well, some of it might wind up confirmed or unconfirmed before the video comes out, if information comes out on, let's say, Tuesday when I'm recording this, especially if it's Tuesday evening. I'm going to do my best to leave in what I'm predicting, even if it gets proven wrong, and I'm sure you guys will roast me in the comments when it is, if Wizards reveals the mechanics I've said I think will be here aren't whether I correct myself or not. Although, that kind of comes with the nature of making these predictions this late into the spoiler process. I'm also going to provide analysis for why I make predictions I do, though, so hopefully this will be interesting regardless of whether I'm correct or not. So first, let's go with the obvious and the basically confirmed. It's a racing theme set. The set symbol is a checkered flag. We've literally already had a vehicle revealed. Motorcycle Chandra that I mentioned in the Genshin video exists. I think it goes without question that we're going to see vehicles as a theme. This has been set up as something we're mechanically working towards in Standard as well. The last major artifact theme in Standard was Lost Caverns of Ixalan, with some seeding for artifact strategies in other Standard sets, or subsets that were only still printed because of the format already being playtested with them in it. And Outlaws of Thunder Junction, speaking of which, did have Mounts and Saddle, which is a non-artifact version of the vehicle mechanic. One of the 3 main planes we're doing is Avishkar, formerly known as Kaladesh, and yes, I'm going to be doing a deeper dive into that name change at some point in the future, although with how tightly packed spoiler season is, this is one that may wind up being a little bit later than I would really want to cover it, but I'm still going to bring it up. A setting that's known for its artifacts and that originally introduced vehicles, along with another mechanic I, in particular, am very likely to be talking about later in this video. In fact, the script's right in front of me. I know I'm talking about it. I think the artifact theme isn't exactly going to stop at vehicles either. I mean, one thing we know about is the Aether Spark, which is an equipment that's also a Planeswalker, and a card I'm going to predict a thing or two about in a moment. It may not be the only equipment in the set either, although I wouldn't be surprised if it was. I actually think most of the non-vehicle artifacts are going to still be either creatures, vanilla artifacts, or something else. We'll talk about that something else they could be later, though. So, while I'm here, like I said, let's talk about the Aether Spark. The big MacGuffin. I'm predicting that at least some of the Planeswalker abilities of the thing, if not all of them to be honest, are going to be things tied to the equipped creature. Although I wouldn't be surprised if equipping it was a plus ability on it. I think that the precedent for some abilities giving creatures some kind of combat abilities means you're going to get doing equipped creature instead of target creature on those kinds of abilities. And most others requiring it to be equipped. In addition, as flavorful as I think a blink effect would be for giving a non-planeswalker the ability to planeswalk, It's not really a thing that Planeswalker cards normally universally do, so I'm not expecting it. But to put it bluntly, I don't think you make that type line and not make the loyalty abilities relevant to it being equipped. Next, we have a pretty easy prediction to make as well, since one of the commander precons is literally named Living Energy. But the bold prediction here is that this isn't going to be limited to the commander deck and have standard legal cards printed for it. I mean, it's not really that bold of a prediction. When's the last time the primary mechanic of a commander deck was something that just plain wasn't in the set it's linked to? Notably, even Miracle Worker wasn't really about miracles, but instead an Enchantment Matters deck that happened to have a miracle mechanic stapled onto the commander. This was also in the Kaladesh set, so when we return to Avishkar, it seems fitting to bring it back there too, since it's the canonical location most associated with it. Although, well, I think cards like Amped Raptor may have been showing us that Muraganda, rather than Ixalan or Ikoria, like it's easy to assume with, Dinosaur. I think Teamer's going to accurately reflect the part of the color pie energy is going to be restricted to as well in this set, and I'm actually going to go out on a limb and say it's primarily going to be a Gruul and Izzet mechanic because of what appears to be the Gruul faction, the Goblin Rocketeers, which I'm aware is me saying that the main faction using Avishkar mechanic is one that isn't from Avishkar in the first place, and this is one of the few times I'll be referencing some of the pre-existing lore articles, but actually, looking at the rest of the script, I actually do it a little bit more often than I was originally planning. Well, the piece on the Rocketeers specifically mentioned a plentiful fuel supply. I also think that even though energy is definitely going to piss some people off, shifting at least one of the primary colors for it and letting a more chaotic group use it will make it more fresh. And spoiler warning, I don't think this is the last time we're going to see energy in 2025, although I don't think this is the one where people will be the most angry about it if I'm correct in that assumption. So, the next prediction is a mechanic that's already in Standard, and that would be the Saddle mechanic. Yes, I do think we're getting both crew and saddle in the same set. I mean, Outlaws of Thunder Destruction did have a couple of vehicles in it. For those who don't know, saddle is crew, but goes on things that are already a creature and normally just gives extra effects when attacking. My prediction is that this is only going to be in green-white, at least in the standard set, since I see the possibility of making this one of the commander decks as well. This prediction also isn't really that bold because the faction that looks like the Selesnya faction also looks like its racers are riding animals rather than cars. It's pretty simple, ties into things already in Standard right now, provides more variation in a set themed around racing, and just to have a little more to say on this one, I think the other faction most likely to have mounts is the Speed Brood, who is pretty much outright stated to be using something like the Alacrian Quick Beasts, with a bonus prediction of being given to the Champions of Amonkhet, potentially, who are most likely Orzhov. I think they'll be unique in terms of the Champions of Amonkhet, potentially wanting to use both crew and saddle in tandem, possibly some of the saddled creatures triggering effects when they crew vehicles, rather than when they attack or when they hit, because of the whole chariot thing going on with the Champions of Amonkhet. And now it's time to get predictions that are a little bit more out there. This is one that I think is the least likely to be the case of all of the ones that I've talked about. As a matter of fact, I'm going to say this now. I'm probably going to bring up the possibility for this for every set going forward, because the main thing I think would be true about this is that it'll happen eventually, and it will piss people off when it does happen, no matter how well it's done, because it's a mechanic that people already hate. And that would be battles. Now, in truth, I don't think this is the set that is the least likely to have battles coming out in 2025, but it's definitely fairly low, primarily because I think there's good enough indication already of a bunch of other things going on that there's less room to include this. That being said, each time I bring it up, I'm also going to talk about what I think battles will look like in each set I bring it up in, because, yeah, I don't think all or even most of the likely scenarios will involve sieges again, and especially not here. So I'll start with why this is probably one of the least likely sets this year for the return of battles. And that's because I think the next battle subtype is going to be one that the person who cast it defends instead of an opponent. One where you cast it with the goal of it staying in play rather than getting rid of it. In theory, this is probably the most likely by way of giving it some kind of Planeswalker-esque ability or passive buff to whoever's defending it. And while that doesn't seem like it fits with a racing theme, I mean, I guess it could. Maybe it can in some way represent the team's pit, where they go for refueling, maintenance, and repair. And with this being more of a death ray style thing, it makes sense for the pits to be something that can be attacked if they were to exist at all. With the context of the possibility of battles being pit stops, I'm also open to the opportunity for them to have tap abilities, because the rules for battles explicitly say they can be tapped. Why would you not just make them unable to be tapped unless you had a reason to want to use their ability to be tapped in the future? Considering how recently we got Delirium in Standard as well, I could also see adding more of an unusual card type to fuel that mechanic more, especially if we have battles that also happen to be artifacts, which ties to the battles representing a pit stop or a home base, primarily a fortress of some sort, which still kind of fits in with the pit stop thing. For my final trick, I want to focus a little bit more on the lore associated with the set, because the fact that a lot of the teams seem to have D-Spark Planeswalkers in them, and the grand prize is something that a lot of those D-Spark Planeswalkers would very much want, for one reason or another, and the fact that Amonkhet is involved in all of this shit, let's be realistic about one possibility of what we're going to see. It feels to me like Wizards is heavily implying that Nicol Bolas is returning as a primary antagonist sometime soon. Primarily because they really only know how to write 3 multiverse-level villains. Seriously, they just dropped the Planeswalker Illuminati like it was Dak Fade, and I will not let them live that down. So, here's a very bold take on what's going to happen. The Aether Rangers are going to win the race. The Masked Racer Spitfire is going to be revealed to be some kind of agent of Bolas, probably someone we already know like Tezzeret or some shit, and they go to take it to Bolas, which leads us to Bolas actually returning in Tarkir, Dragonstorm. Some details might be a little bit different from that, but I think we're dealing with Lute being the primary perspective character of the overarching plot, the way that Kellen was the perspective character starting from Wilds of Eldraine. So more than likely, Lute's going to escape Winter and follow whoever gets the Aether Spark to Tarkir, or just know what's happening and needing to warn the dragons or something like that. And if you thought the battles or energy were going to piss people off, no. I think good card design could make at least some people look past that if it comes true. Luke being here at all? Luke potentially being in Tarkir? That's where the rage comes into play. So, what do you think? Any of this sound like it could be true? Does all of it sound like hot garbage? How much does Lute enrage you? Let me know in the comments how much you want me to talk about the Chinese Nurchit instead of the American Nurchit, and I'll catch you degenerates later while I actually do my old outro again. Until then, this is your friendly neighborhood Boonslayer, signing out. God, it feels like 2014 when I say that shit.